The morning began like any other, with the soft hum of suburban life filtering through my bedroom window, birds chirping, a distant lawnmower buzzing, the occasional car rolling by. Then came the splashing. Loud, frantic splashing, the kind you'd associate with someone flailing in a desperate struggle for air. I jolted awake, my mind foggy with sleep, and stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet as I made my way to the back porch. Rubbing my eyes, I pushed open the screen door and froze. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted straight through the floorboards. There, in the community pool just beyond my backyard fence, floated an absurd flotilla of my belongings. My outdoor chairs bobbed like sad, abandoned life rafts. My fire pit drifted lazily, half submerged, its metal rim glinting in the morning sun. Even my decorative lanterns, those rustic ones I'd spent an afternoon arranging just so, were adrift, clinking mournfully against the pool ladder with every ripple. The cushions from my patio set floated like soggy, oversized marshmallows, their once vibrant fabric now a dull, waterlogged mess. I blinked, trying to process the surreal scene, when my gaze landed on the culprit. Standing triumphantly beside the pool, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter, was Linda. Linda Harper, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a woman who ruled our little neighborhood with the iron fist of a tyrant dressed in yoga pants and a taupe cardigan. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, not a strand out of place, and her lips curled into a smug smile that radiated pure, unadulterated satisfaction. She looked like she'd just performed a public service, as if tossing my possessions into the deep end was an act of heroism. "Consider this a warning," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. She tapped her pen against the clipboard with a rhythmic precision that made my skin crawl. "Unapproved outdoor furniture is a direct violation of HOA Code 4.6, Section B, Paragraph 2. I had no choice but to take action. I stood there, barefoot on the porch, my pajama pants still wrinkled from sleep, staring at her in disbelief. "Take action? You threw my stuff in the pool." My brain scrambled for a response, but all I could manage was a hoarse, "You've got to be kidding me." "You left me no choice," she replied, her tone dripping with mock regret. She brushed an imaginary speck of dust off her pristine sweater, a gesture so rehearsed it could have been choreographed. "Your clutter was an eyesore, a blight on this neighborhood's aesthetic standards. And by the way," she reached into her clipboard, producing an envelope with a flourish, and extended it toward me like she was delivering a royal decree. "You'll need to pay for the pool cleaning. Your debris has compromised the water quality. The invoice is $1,200. Cash or check, due by the end of the week." I wanted to laugh, a wild, unhinged cackle that would echo across the block. I wanted to scream until my throat gave out. I wanted to march over, snatch that clipboard, and shove Linda headfirst into the pool to join my floating lanterns. Instead, I took the envelope, my fingers tightening around it until the paper crinkled under the pressure. "This isn't over," I muttered, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. Linda's smirk widened, her eyes glinting with something almost predatory. "Oh, I hope not," she said, as if she relished the idea of a challenge. Then she turned on her heel, her sensible flats clicking against the pavement as she strode away, leaving me to deal with the wreckage. It hadn't always been like this. When I'd moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier, I'd been naive enough to think I'd stumbled into a slice of suburban paradise. The houses were charming, with neatly trimmed hedges and pastel shutters. The streets were lined with towering oaks, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The neighbors had seemed friendly, at least, most of them had. I'd waved at folks walking their dogs, exchanged small talk over mailboxes, and even attended a block party where someone handed me a lukewarm lemonade and a flyer about the HOA. It all felt so quaint, so welcoming. Then I met Linda. Linda didn't just run the Homeowners Association, she embodied it. She was the HOA's heart, soul, and clenched fist, a one-woman enforcement machine who treated every minor infraction like a personal affront. Challenge her rules, and you'd find passive-aggressive notes taped to your door, public reprimands at monthly meetings, or, as I'd just learned, your backyard furniture taking an unscheduled swim. I'd heard whispers about her from day one, how she'd once fined a guy for painting his garage door too bold, a shade of blue, how she'd measured lawns with a ruler to ensure grass didn't exceed 3 inches, but I'd brushed it off as exaggeration. Surely no one could be that petty. I was wrong. The escalation begins. The trouble had started small, creeping into my life like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor's soaked. First, it was the ceramic turtle statue I'd placed in my flower bed, a little guy with a goofy grin I'd picked up at a flea market. I'd barely set it down when Linda appeared, clipboard in hand, informing me that kitschy garden decorations were prohibited unless pre-approved by the HOA's aesthetic committee, which, surprise, was just Linda. I'd grumbled but hauled the turtle inside, figuring it wasn't worth the fight. Next came the string lights I'd strung across my back patio. They were subtle, warm white bulbs that cast a cozy glow, hardly a Vegas marquee. Yet Linda left a note claiming they were excessively festive and violated the HOA's exterior lighting guidelines. I took them down, rolling my eyes at the absurdity. Each complaint seemed more ridiculous than the last, but I played along, thinking compliance was the path of least resistance. I didn't want to be that neighbor, the one who rocked the boat and earned a permanent spot on Linda's hit list. Then came the barbecue. It was a quiet night, nothing wild, just a handful of friends, some burgers sizzling on the grill, a playlist humming softly through a portable speaker. I'd invited Mark, a retired prankster from down the street who'd welcomed me with a handshake and a bad pun, and Sarah, a wine-loving neighbor whose lawn could have graced a magazine cover. We were laughing over a story about Mark's old job as a mailman when Linda stormed across my yard, her clipboard practically vibrating with indignation. "This is an unapproved gathering," she declared, jabbing her pen toward us like it was a sword. "Noise ordinances apply after 7 p.m., and I've already received complaints." I glanced at my watch. "It's 6:30, I said, keeping my tone even. "Don't get smart with me," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You're on thin ice." I half expected her to retreat and write me up in some snarky HOA newsletter, but she had bigger plans. The next morning, I found my fire pit tagged with a bright orange sticker, violation. Days later, a letter arrived, warning that repeat offenses would result in disciplinary action. I had no idea her version of action involved turning my patio into a pool party. As I stood by the pool that morning, staring at my ruined belongings, something snapped. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. Linda had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I started by hauling my chairs and lanterns out of the water, the cushions dripping a trail of chlorinated misery across the pavement as I dragged them back to my yard. Linda lingered on her porch across the street, sipping coffee from a mug emblazoned with live, laugh, love, and curly script. The irony wasn't lost on me. I resisted the urge to lob a soggy cushion at her head and instead began plotting my next move, assembling the resistance. Later that day, I made some calls, determined to find out if I was Linda's only victim. Turns out, I wasn't even close. Mark had once been fined $500 for planting flowers he'd lovingly tended. Apparently, their shade of purple was one tone too vibrant for Linda's taste. Sarah had gotten a citation for leaving her recycling bin out 15 minutes past pickup time, a $50 penalty she still grumbled about over her nightly glass of Pinot. Then there was Mr. Evans, an elderly war veteran who lived 3 houses down. He'd been written up because his American flag, proudly displayed on a pole in his front yard, was half an inch too wide according to Linda's meticulous measurements. She told me it disrupted the neighborhood's uniformity, he'd growled when I asked. I fought for that flag, and she's measuring it with a damn ruler. Linda's rule wasn't just annoying, it was a vendetta. She thrived on control, turning every corner of the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. Fueled by frustration and a couple of beers shared with Mark and Sarah on my porch that evening, I decided enough was enough. If Linda wanted a war, she'd get one. We started small but satisfying. The next morning, I fired up my lawnmower at exactly 6:59 a.m., 1 minute before the HOA's noise ordinance lifted. The roar of the engine echoed through the quiet streets, and sure enough, Linda burst out of her house in a fluffy robe, her hair still in curlers. She glared at me, hands on hips, but I just waved cheerfully and kept mowing. She couldn't touch me. I was within the rules. Next, I filled my front yard with a dozen neon pink flamingos, their plastic legs stabbed into the grass like a garish army. Technically, they weren't garden gnomes or statues, so they skirted Linda's ban on unapproved decor. Mark, ever the instigator, joined in by planting a row of plastic sunflowers along his driveway, each topped with a windmill that spun and clattered in the breeze. Sarah, meanwhile, forgot to bring her trash cans in for 2 days straight, leaving them curbside in silent defiance. Word spread, and soon the neighborhood was in quiet revolt. Someone painted their mailbox a blinding shade of green. Another left a kiddie pool in their driveway, just to see if Linda would notice. She did. Linda patrolled the streets like a furious mall cop, her clipboard trembling with rage as she scribbled violations faster than her pen could keep up. But our crowning achievement came courtesy of Mark's old buddy at a printing shop. Together, we crafted fake HOA letters, formatted to look official, complete with the association's logo and Linda's forged signature. The notices declared bizarre new rules. Residents must display pool noodles on their lawns at all times. Joggers must wear hats shaped like traffic cones. Front doors must be adorned with wind chimes tuned to patriotic melodies. We stuffed them in every mailbox on the block, and by morning, the neighborhood was in hysterics. I caught Mr. Evans chuckling on his porch, a rare smile cracking his stern face as he waved one of the letters at me. Traffic cones, huh? She'll lose her mind. Linda did. She retaliated with a vengeance. One evening, I came home to a letter taped to my door, a formal HOA violation claiming I'd vandalized the pool area. Attached was grainy security footage, clearly doctored, showing a figure with my build dumping trash bags into the water. "You've gone too far," Mark said when I showed him, his usual grin replaced by a scowl. "No," I replied, staring at the fabricated evidence. "Linda has." It was clear petty pranks wouldn't cut it anymore. I needed to fight fire with fire, and that meant digging into her past, unearthing Linda's secrets. I spent the next few nights hunched over my laptop, a cup of lukewarm coffee at my side, scouring the internet for anything I could use against her. I called nearby neighborhoods, posing as a curious newcomer, and pieced together a chilling picture. Linda had been kicked out of her previous HOA for financial misconduct, a polite way of saying she'd been caught funneling association funds into personal projects. The details were hazy, but one name kept popping up: Mrs. Harper, a former HOA president who'd been Linda's nemesis before resigning under mysterious circumstances. I tracked Mrs. Harper down at a retirement community 2 towns over. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, and the moment I mentioned Linda's name, her expression darkened. She invited me in, poured me a cup of tea, and spent the next hour unloading a torrent of stories. Linda had framed neighbors for vandalism by planting trash in their yards, faked evidence during disputes, and manipulated HOA records to hide her tracks. "She's a snake," Mrs. Harper warned, her voice low and steady. "Whatever she's doing in your neighborhood, it's just the beginning. She doesn't stop until she's broken everyone, or been broken herself." Armed with Mrs. Harper's testimony and a few financial records she'd kept as souvenirs, I had leverage, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Linda was slippery, and she'd lawyer up or deny everything unless I had something ironclad. My opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, she posted flyers announcing a special HOA meeting, an emergency session to address the pool vandalism, and pin it on me. She thought she had me cornered, and her smug confidence practically oozed from the paper. The night of the meeting, the HOA clubhouse was packed. Linda stood at the front, dressed in her finest cardigan, clutching her infamous clipboard as the crowd murmured. She smiled sweetly, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Residents, I've called this meeting to address a recent act of vandalism that has contaminated our community pool. The footage we've obtained clearly identifies one individual responsible." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes locking onto mine. "Mr. Ryan." I expected gasps, maybe a few accusatory stares. Instead, there was an awkward silence, the kind that settles when people are just tired of listening to the same voice. Linda pressed on, spinning a theatrical tale of my supposed crime. When she finally called for a vote to fine me $2,000 for damages, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Before you decide," I said, raising my voice to cut through her monologue, You should hear this. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The room filled with Linda's voice, recorded crystal clear by a friend who'd caught her bragging to her accountant over coffee. Falsifying complaints is easy, she'd said, her tone smug. Doctor the footage, slap a fine on them. They'll pay up or move out. And the HOA funds? A little creative accounting, and no one notices. She'd laughed, boasting. Control's simple when everyone's too scared to question me. The room erupted. Linda's face drained of color, her clipboard clattering to the floor as she stammered about privacy violations and fabricated evidence. No one bought it. Residents shouted accusations. Some demanded refunds for fines they'd paid. Others called for her resignation. Mark couldn't hide his grin, and even Mr. Evans smirked from the back. Linda stormed out, her reign officially over. That night, I sat on my porch with Mark, Sarah, and Mr. Evans, toasting our victory with Sarah's favorite Pinot. We watched as a moving truck pulled up to Linda's house. She packed her beige decor into boxes marked fragile in furious silence, her car eventually peeling out of the driveway. To HOA freedom, Mark said, raising his beer. To Linda finally leaving, I added. But just as we clinked glasses, Sarah squinted down the street. Wait, is that her? A car pulled up to a house on the corner, and a familiar figure stepped out, clipboard in hand. She's not gone, I muttered, my stomach twisting. She's just getting started. Linda's return as Deborah Klein. Linda didn't vanish, she reinvented herself. A week later, a new name appeared on the community bulletin board, Deborah Klein, acting HOA president. It took me a moment to connect the dots. Klein was Linda's middle name, a thin disguise to slink back under the radar. She kept a low profile at first, no outrageous fines or clipboard-waving tirades, just watching from the shadows. It was unnerving. I braced for a letter every time I checked my mailbox, but nothing came. Even Mark, always eager to stir the pot, admitted she seemed too quiet. It's like the calm before a storm, he said one night over beers. He wasn't wrong. The storm hit one morning when I found my mailbox stuffed with notices. Deborah had filed complaints about everything. My lawn had excessive discoloration. My trash cans were too visible. My porch lights caused a disruptive glare. The wildest one accused me of running a nuisance business out of my garage, which was laughable since the most exciting thing in there was a rusty lawnmower. Before I could even process the nonsense, my phone rang. It was Mark, his voice tight. Get outside. Now. I stepped onto my porch and felt my stomach lurch. A tow truck idled in front of my driveway, the driver circling my car like a vulture. Linda stood nearby, smug as ever, her Deborah, alias barely concealing her glee. Unregistered vehicle, she announced loudly, ensuring the whole street heard. I filed the complaint last week. It's being removed for violating HOA code. I protested. It was registered. I had the paperwork. But by the time I ran inside and back, the truck was dragging my car away. Linda smirked. I'll send you the bill. That night, my frustration boiled over. I gathered Mark, Sarah, and Mr. Evans at my kitchen table, determined to end Linda's games. Mark paced like a caged animal, muttering about revenge. Sarah, on her third glass of wine, suggested accidentally spilling red paint on Linda's garage door. Mr. Evans, ever the calm strategist, tapped his pen against a notepad. She's slipping up, he said. Fake reports mean she's desperate. We need to know what she's after. Power? Money. Mark snorted. It's always money, Mr. Evans replied, his eyes narrowing. That got me thinking. Linda's complaints weren't random. They targeted homeowners already behind on minor fees, piling fines to push them out. Digging through public records and HOA filings, I uncovered her scheme. She was forcing sales to buy properties cheap, flip them, and profit. Prime lots near the entrance were her focus. She wasn't just a bully. She was a predator. We needed proof. Mark's buddy lent U.S. security cameras with audio, and we had one in a fake birdhouse aimed at Linda's porch. 3 days later, we hit gold. The footage showed Linda on her porch, talking to a slick realtor in a flashy suit. For more properties by month's end, she bragged. Once I find that idiot Ryan again, he'll crack like the rest. I stared at the screen, stunned. She wasn't just after me. She wanted the whole block. The next morning, I took the recording to the HOA board. Linda was there, chatting up her cronies. But when I played the tape, her Deborah facade crumbled. The board stripped her title and banned her on the spot. Her plan unraveled. Residents she'd pressured canceled their sales, and she packed up and drove off, glaring at me one last time. The shadow returns. Peace settled in. Cookouts returned, lawns bloomed with unapproved flowers, and the air felt lighter without Linda's shadow. But 2 weeks later, I woke to find my mailbox ransacked, papers strewn across my lawn. Then I checked my backyard. My furniture was gone, replaced by a single beige chair like a taunting signature. Mark's tires were slashed, Sarah's bins dumped, Mr. Evans' flower bed trampled. A week later, fake violation notices with Linda's signature plaster my house. I knew she was back. One night, I spotted her under a street lamp, staring at my house. I chased her to a vacant property where Mark and I broke in. Her plans littered the table: sabotage, fake complaints, a hit list. Upstairs, she ranted to herself as we called the cops. They caught her with paint cans and evidence, charging her with trespassing and harassment. At our next cookout, we celebrated her arrest. Sarah asked, "She's gone for good now, right?" I glanced at the shadows. "She's gone," I said, hoping it was true. "And if not, we're ready."